Welcome back. We are now going to talk about social circles when it comes to consumer behavior and the tension between online and offline forms of communication. Now, there's some similarities here. Of course, both are about instant gratification, tailored communication. But where they inherently differ is one is offline and one is on. So let's first look at in real life forms of communication and how those have shifted. There's a new stage of life emerging for millennials. It's somewhere between adolescence and adulthood. But just because millennials are living their lives a little bit differently doesn't mean it's any better or worse than previous generations. There's some factors that are bleeding into the decisions that they're making today. In fact, 80% of millennials don't have a mortgage or home loan. Wages have stagnated, housing prices have skyrocketed, which has led to a new phenomenon of uncoupled cohabitation for longer periods of time, where people are living with a friend or maybe two friends for longer periods of their life and far into adulthood. For some, these relationships they have with their roommates are extended into different periods of their life, making more deeper connections for longer periods of time, especially as people delay having children or even doing things like getting married. That's why we're seeing things like roommate prenups coming to light. We even see a whole industry burgeoning around this concept of uncoupled cohabitation, like Zip. Because if you want your home cleaned, if you have a roommate, maybe you only want your room cleaned. And this is the app for you if you want that. Akasa is another example, an expense tracking app perfect for roommates if you have more than one or two. 50% of millennials feel loved after hanging out in real life, but only 18% of boomers feel the same. This represents a seismic shift in the way that this generation is thinking about friendship and connection as opposed to the previous generations. And I want to dive into a little bit about the differences between these generational relationships and their face-to-face connections. First, starting with boomers, who, by no surprise, love face-to-face connections. And they are a lot more private about what they're willing to share than other generations I'll be diving into. Generation X has few relationships, but what they do have are incredibly deep and meaningful in their lives. Millennials could not be more different. They consider friends family and are incredibly open with the details that they're willing to share, those in their lives, even if they are more acquaintances. Generation Z, however, has swung back the pendulum, back to Gen Z and boomers, having fewer relationships and being more private with what they're willing to share than their millennial counterparts. We've also seen some shifts happen when it comes to family dynamics and face-to-face connection there. Nowadays, you can just put in your AirPods and tune out your kids at the dinner table, whereas before you actually had to sit down and listen to them. But what our research has found is that despite this pervasiveness of technology in our life, we're actually spending more face-to-face time with our families today. Mothers are spending 2 times more time with their kids than they did in 1975, doing a wide array of activities with them, whether it's cooking or bringing them to classes. Now, the reason for this level of involvement is because, for the first time in history, American kids have a higher likelihood of being less prosperous than their parents. It's the reason why parents feel the need to be over-involved, but we're actually seeing pushback against this as well, with things like the Utah free-range parenting law, which says that you can't call child services on someone who lets their 12-year-old play in the park alone. It's about giving your kids a sense of freedom and trusting in your community. The days of leashing your kids are long gone. Australia, Britain, the States, and even here in Canada have all historically considered child rearing something of an individual task as opposed to a societal one. But all that is changing. We're relying more on our uncoupled cohabitators to help raise our kids, our families, and our community as a whole. And one of the trends that plays really well into this that we've studied is mindful daycare, where we're looking to further not only the education of our children, but also the mental well-being, and relying on the community to help us do so. Now, one great example of this that we have is from WeWork. They've created an offshoot called WeGrow, which is a school that focuses on 6 key pillars: nature, soul, conscious creators, body, arts, and the mind. What this school does is allow kids to become entrepreneurial thinkers. How would they start their own business? Learn about foods they should and should not be eating, and cook for themselves, and be a better citizen globally. Much different than our regular school curriculums. What's the future of in real life connection? Well, new stages of life for consumers means new opportunity for the brands listening to this module. People are using those face-to-face connections with brands, with friends, with loved ones as a way to distress from their day-to-day lives. And it's important as we think about communicating with our consumers, especially if it's in person, that we're looking at those micro-generational drivers, because we can't paint everyone with the same brush. Now next, I want to get into URL, online forms of communication and social circles. And I want to look back at the graph that I had up earlier. Platforms of choice between generations differ vastly, and I want to explore why that is and how that relates to their face-to-face connections as well. No surprise here, with boomers being more private, they prefer something like Facebook, where they can share articles about what they like but don't have to get too intimate with the details, or can have a small group of family members that they're sharing photos with. When it comes to Generation X, they're less adventurous with their platforms, and they don't really care about how many followers they have, which is why Pinterest is appealing to them. Millennials, on the other hand, love platforms like Instagram. They love sharing intimate details of their lives, sometimes even live, and they're incredibly follower-based as well, so Instagram provides that perfect satiation of that need. Gen Z is a little bit different though. They like to bring their close friends even closer and don't really care about their number of followers as much as the millennial cohort. That's why things like Snapchat appeal to them. These close, intimate relationships are also mirrored in their online sphere as well. One thing that all of these platforms have in common though, however, is that they're all highly visual, because a picture can speak 1,000 words. Because if you're saying Happy Monday to someone and you pair it with a GIF like this, you know exactly what they're thinking. It encapsulates that emotion. And most consumers agree. 61% of millennials and Gen Z say that photos help them express themselves in ways that text never could. And savvy brands are catching on to this. Marriott is just one example. So they've integrated Slack in their platform where you can use thumbs up and thumbs down emojis to help plan trips with your friends. On top of that, video is a huge medium that brands should be utilizing. And we see branded webisode really pushing that to the next level, creating an emotional connection with consumers today. Brands doing a great job of this include Airbnb, who profiles their superhosts from all around the world, getting to know their intimate stories, how they've built and decorated their home, and how they're excited to meet you when you get to their place. Urban Outfitters also has a fantastic web series, which features people who have used their decor and furniture to create their own personal lifestyle brand in their home and explain who they are and why certain items speak to them specifically. When it comes to IRL versus URL, the tension there is clear. Online versus offline. So to bridge that gap, it's about an omni-channel approach. You can't just focus on one or the other. How are you creating a seamless experience, whether your consumer is clicking on a website or visiting a retail store or a pop-up? Thanks for joining me for the Social Circles module. Now I have a couple of workshop questions for you. What can you do to foster more personalized relationships with your consumers? And rate your company on a scale of 1 to 10 on its visual identity. What would need to change for it to score a 10?